Hey, fight fans, Jay Petrie here from SureDog.com with another episode of Unleashed. Our normal host, Ant Walker, is off today. It's a holiday, it's Labor Day, so, people do what they do. It's all right. Got a great, smaller, but still excellent panel of two friends on here. First of all, I'd like to introduce our guest, Pat Auger, formerly of SureDog.com, now of the Body Lock. Pat, how you doing, pal?
Doing good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, really appreciate you coming on. It's been a week, all right. But anyway, anchoring the panel today will be SureDog.com senior editor Ben Duffy. What's up, Ben?
Hey, how's it going? I'm just super refreshed because I was done with the UFC card at 10:45 local time and had the rest of my day ahead of me. It was amazing.
Let me tell you what, that was pretty refreshing. Let me turn this off real quick. That was pretty refreshing, I have to say, to be done with the UFC card. So I want to talk about that UFC card, and I can start it off by talking about the stat of the week, because, the stat of the week. Stat of the week is 2. And this is a follow-up to a stat of the week from May that y'all might remember. 2, Alistair Overeem, he won this weekend. He knocked out Augusto Sakai in the 5th round. He is now the second fighter in UFC history to ever win and lose a fight in the 5th round. Glover Teixeira is the first, which happened in May when he did terrible, horrible, no good, very bad things to Anthony Smith. So let's talk about this fight card. Fight Night 176 or ESPN Plus 33 or whatever number they have, and all the Vegas 9, I think is what it was called. 7-fight card. So first of all, 7 fights were on the card. We'll touch on that a little bit. But the main event did feature Alistair Overeem finishing Augusto Sakai, maybe had a couple rough rounds, came back, used his takedown game that is developing for a 40-year-old kickboxer, and finished the job in the 5th round. So I'd like to ask you, and I'll start with Pat. Alistair Overeem, 40 years young. He's in, I believe, the top 5 now. I think he's number 5 officially after Daniel Cormier was lifted from the rankings. He may even go up depending on the win. So top 5 heavyweight guy. Who do you put in front of him next? What's next for Overeem?
Honestly, thinking about this, the only thing that I really want to see that makes sense is if he's really dead serious about going on another title run, like he seems to be tweeting out, seems to say, one last run, all of that as well. I think you do Overeem versus Rozenstruik too. I think that is the fight to make. He was winning that fight until the last 5 seconds or so. He was clearly winning that fight. Wasn't exactly super thrilling. Not 24 minutes that I really thoroughly enjoyed the full way through, but it's the only thing that really makes sense for him if he's going to go on another run. Everyone else is either someone he's already fought before and beaten, or is someone that I don't think you should do. I mean, Ngannou obviously should be going for the title. You could do Derek Lewis, but that seems kind of like a bit of a weird matchup in my opinion. I think Rozenstruik is the way to go. I think it makes the most sense, especially since Lewis is booked against Blades right now anyway. I think that's the only fight to make.
So what do you think, Mr. Duffy? Is there any other play at heavyweight, or is Rozenstruik your guy too?
Well, the other problem with Lewis and Blades is they're not fighting until November. He can't sit on the shelf that long.
Yes.
We have Volkov and Harris who are about to fight. He's already fought Harris, obviously. That was a fun fight while it lasted. It was kind of the Sakai fight condensed. Volkov is basically the only guy in the top 10 he hasn't fought yet, other than the ones that are in the logjam at the top. So I'm not looking at this trying to find a way to get him a title shot. I don't need that narrative. He clearly needs it. He's saying, I got 3 more fights. Daniel Cormier on the desk is like, well, maybe he could fight for a title in his last fight. I don't need any of that. I just want him to fight the next guy. Let him keep winning. I don't see a clear and easy way to get him to a title shot without, doing some travesties on some people. So, yeah, I mean, if he wants to wait for the winner of Harris and Volkov, that works for me. Just, I don't think he needs to sit on the shelf for 5 months waiting for Lewis and what's his name, to Lewis and Blades to sort it out. Yeah. Even though Lewis wants it with him, apparently. Like he was tweeting, and that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Just, even, after a round that he clearly won, he's like, yeah, I give that one 10-7 to Sakai because Overeem wouldn't stop talking.
Yeah, man, that whole coverage of the fight, the UFC kept slapping up the tweets of Derek Lewis, sold me a fight I didn't know I wanted until they started putting it together and kind of going, boy, wouldn't that be fun? And it is such a shame in terms of matchmaking purposes and shelf time, and the fact that he is 40 years young, and heavyweights are one of the only divisions that can really go stretch past there and still fare well. Glover Teixeira aside and Uriah Faber, but
Romero.
Yeah, well, Romero might be like 70. We really have no idea.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
But Overeem is in such a strange place because he's fought everybody. He fought Stipe. He stepped inside the cage with Ngannou and something happened. Blades, Rosenstrike, Joe Dos Santos, Sakai, Harris. I mean, most of the top 10 he's met, and the others. I like the one of the two presented. I like the Volkov fight a little more because then it would move the contenders up. And this isn't to trash on Walt Harris, but I don't see many avenues that he can win a 5-round fight with. No, it's not a 5-round fight. It's not the anal event. A 3-round fight against the much longer technical boxer that is Alexander Volkov. So I like the matchup if Volkov wins. The Rosenstrike fight, yeah, it makes sense, but it was still December. I'm so burned out on recent rematches, but it has been a few fights, and that fight was so controversial. And Overeem still this on the media week before the fight, he said, yeah, that was a bad stoppage. Like, he still has that. So it's refreshing that there are options at heavyweight, and there's still a logjam at the top. And there's kind of path to move around. So I do like that. I kind of like each of the fights that you guys mentioned for different reasons, because, there's unfinished business sort of with Rosenstrike, and Volkov is the one of the only guys he hasn't fought, and Derek Lewis would be hilarious. But if Reem wants to keep fighting, I think it's the next soonest guy, which could be, I don't know, Lukoy Ivanov at this rate, just in terms of hurry up, give me my next fighter, Tanner Boser, hurry up, let's go. But who knows? So that wasn't the only dramatic event when Overeem did his thing, and we'll push past the Oven St. Preux ridiculous knockout unless you guys have anything to say about that, and skip to the featured fight, which is that third to last fight that happened, which was a welterweight. What's the word? It wasn't a mess. It didn't have as much nonsense as I thought it would. It didn't quite need Keith Peterson involvement, but it was still a lot of wackiness happen. I'm talking about the welterweight match between Michel Pereira and Pereira-Imadaev. And what do you think, Duff?
The end of the fight had more nonsense than Keith Peterson and his family could eat in 50 years, dude. That was the atrocious bullshit.
So okay, I guess we have a very slight audible. Good or Duffy, we'll start with you because you have a couple thoughts. Good or bad stoppage? The rear naked choke, by the way, came at 4 minutes and 39 seconds into the final round. Yes, and it was back and forth, and Imadaev may not have tapped. What do you think, Duffy? Good or bad stoppage?
I think it was a bad stoppage. I mean, Imadaev wasn't tapping. Mm-hmm. There were 20 seconds left in the fight. Basically, at this point, we're going to have to, well, we're not going to choose, but the Nevada Athletic Commission is going to choose our poison for us. The best case scenario is that it stands as is, and Imadaev has a legitimate complaint. He had 15 or 20 seconds left to escape, maybe to win the fight. I mean, obviously, it's unlikely, but this, there's no 10-run rule here. There's no tech fall. Like, we fight out the full 15 minutes so that these guys can do what they do. Ask Andrew Craig. At the very least, he had 15 seconds to survive, and that goes down on his record as a decision loss instead of a stoppage. For a guy who just lost his third straight UFC fight, shit hinges on that. Mm-hmm. And that's the better scenario. The worst scenario is if this gets flipped to a no contest, it's my robbery of the year. for someone who did not pick Pereira to win this fight, for him to put together just easily the most consummate performance of his UFC run so far, and to have it flip to a no contest, and for the first time, it's not because of some stupid shit that he did, would be like, that would be a travesty. That would be a serious miscarriage of justice. So, I mean, that's all I have to say about that. And the thing is, not shitting on Chris Tagnoni here, because if anything, in this new COVID era of being able to hear what the refs are saying and what they're doing so much more clearly, if anything, he's come to the fore as a pretty solid dude. I love his "you're responsible for your weapons" after inadvertent fouls. Like that's my new jam. But just in general, he's come off as a level-headed guy and has not made any egregiously bad calls. So I'm not calling for his head here, but yeah, it sure looks to me like he fucked up.
So Pat, there's Snowflake's chance that Imadaev can get this overturned. Do you think? It's in Vegas. The controversial, he was moving to break the grip, tap, no tap kind of thing. Do you think he has a chance on appeal?
Yeah, no, I think he definitely has a chance on appeal. I mean, that replay made it seem pretty clear that he was fighting the hands. And as much as the UFC would love to have that stand at worst as a decision loss, as Ben has already pointed out, Paul Craig is a perfect example of, or Derek Lewis for that. I mean, what, the most significant strike differential in heavyweight history, and then came back. Like, you can't, it's only 20 seconds. I doubt it would have gone anywhere, but especially with Pereira, of all people, who loves to just flip and accidentally DQ Diego Sanchez. Like, you can't rule that out. So, I mean, I think as much as that hurts, I think they are in a bind and they will probably end up having to overturn it into a no contest because of the precedent it sets. Even if you had it become a decision loss because he was behind so far, what does that precedent set for the rest of fights that happen that way, right? And again, like you can list off the amount of fights with crazy comebacks, Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva. Like, I mean, there's a million of them, and so you can't. You kind of gotta overturn it because of the ref, which is a bummer for Pereira because I agree he looked great here, but I think there's a solid chance it's gonna happen. We'll see, but I would say he certainly has a case no matter what. That's for sure.
Oh, I said Andrew Craig when I meant Paul Craig.
My
Houston is clearly showing, but
hey, he had a good performance against Chris Lieben. So, so keeping with Michel Pereira and his tactics and skills and unorthodox technique, and the fact that he DQ'd Diego Sanchez by kneeing him in the head with a crazy strike, I'll stay with you, Pat. So, what we saw in this fight, or at least what we think we saw in this fight from Pereira, is a slightly more composed, don't burn out all your gas in the first round by backflipping and, what would have happened if you landed the stomps to the body, because those are illegal, all those kinds of different things. So I believe, and you touched on it, we saw a more composed, more focused, and less ridiculous Michel Pereira. So no contest or not, can he become a star in the division? Would you swing or would you miss on that?
I would personally, right now, I would miss on that, and here's why. Regardless of how composed he looks, Imadaev is not a world beater by any means. I mean, if you look at his record, he seems to be kind of a bit of a can crusher. Came in, and he's lost 2 in a row. Now he's lost 3, and even if he gets overturned to a no contest, he definitely should have lost that one. He's not a world beater. In the fight against Tristan Conley, even before Pereira, blew his gas tank, Conley was still holding his own. It's hard to say that he could become a star. I think here's the real thing for me is I think Pereira, we'll see where he goes. Give him a step up in competition for sure. I disagree wholeheartedly with Jorge Masvidal or Nate Diaz. I think that's a terrible choice. But give him a step up in competition. See how he goes. See how he does. But honestly, where I think he's going to be a star is his craziness. I think that he needs to be backflipping and he needs to be doing those crazy spinning things. I think he has the opportunity to be one of those guys, especially if, he trash talks a bit or gets a little bit of swagger about him. He can be one of the rare few that can lose and still get a bit of a cult following just for how crazy he is in the cage. So right now I'm saying a miss because I haven't seen enough out of him to say like, oh, this guy's going to be a megastar. He's going to be insanely good, especially against his opponents. But who knows where that goes? I continue to watch and enjoy his fights. That's for sure. And I hope he keeps doing that crazy stuff. But again, how far is that going to get you against real competition? So.
Yeah, I mean, Duffy, the competition that he's faced, I mean, Tristan Connolly was a lightweight who came up on extremely short notice, weathered the storm, took him down, got through it, and won the fight in a spectacularly upsetting fashion, in how unspectacular and, orthodox it was. It was using the fundamentals and he did the damn thing. So Michel Pereira's only win, I mean, if this is overturned, is against Danny Roberts, which he flying knee smashed him in the face, and then that one shot, I believe, which is similar to how Johnny Walker did it when he made his splash. And there are some other fighters in the divisions that are wild men but aren't top dogs. Like Zaleski dos Santos is a high flying, he knocked a guy out with a spinning wheel kick and a flying knee, and he's that kind of guy who has a cult following, like Pat said, but he isn't a household name. Duffy, can Michel Pereira cross the threshold with his antics? Would you swing to say that he can go to the next level by his craziness?
I think his ceiling, based on what I've seen so far, is a cross between Johnny Walker and Lando Vannata. Vannata is a guy that,
that's another one.
I mean, he's not as wild, but he has gotten a lot of mileage out of getting Tony Ferguson in trouble for about 3 minutes. Like, really, the high water mark of his competitive career was having a top 5 fighter in a bit of trouble for like half a round. That's more impressive than any of his actual wins in the UFC, and yet he's still around. And that to me is the ceiling for Pereira. And I picked him to lose. I thought he looked fantastic. I mean, if he can, because the thing is, he didn't abandon his weird techniques. He was still doing Superman punches and Showtime kicks and Showtime punches and just all of his wild stuff, but he just didn't get tired, and he didn't DQ, himself or just put himself in a horrible situation.
Which
but
was
even
my pick,
so,
by the way, was for him to DQ.
I don't blame you. It was a valid way to look at it. But even so, just the division he's in, the whole top 15 is full of guys who are more than capable of defending themselves in a kickboxing match and are also complete physical bullies, whether they're like just traditional wrestlers or just dudes that want to get you up against the cage and just suck your will to live. I would need to see him take on one of those types to even say if his ceiling is to get into the top 10 at some point.
Yeah, I checked, and unfortunately there was no betting line on Imadaev by disqualification. I don't know if you'd call that inside the distance or not, but that line wasn't there. But he does have the kind of style that gets people talking. But I would argue that the biggest thing that Pereira did wasn't the fight. It was his post-fight. It was calling out Jorge Masvidal, because even though people scoff and laugh at it, that was the first thing we said about him was the matchups. I don't want either of the matchups against Diaz or Masvidal, and I don't either. It's total nonsense. Even on Diaz's run or lack thereof at welterweight, come on, I would want him sniffing, who's number 15, Robbie Lawler. Ooh, no, thank you. I don't want any of that across the board. What's up?
Mike Perry. That's who you should fight.
People,
and their names are so similar.
Yeah, SP versus MP.
Not bad. I'm in terms of odd matchups, that would probably have some nonsense. So I'm starting to adapt more of the Tyler Treese mentality. Bring me the chaos. Let's get weird. Let's do all that nonsense. So there was some nonsense, as we know, and to curtail and transition into this, I'd like to bring up a segment that's very near and dear to my heart called "I'm Not Surprised, Mr. Falcons," and it's there were some surprising things that happened this week in the news, and then at the event itself. Could be related to pre-fight coverage, the fights themselves, what happened after, some news coverage. So, Pat, what's your "I'm Not Surprised, Mr. Falcon" story from this week?
I mean, I guess the most surprising thing for me was that out of all the fights that got canceled, the Ovince Preux-Menifield fight actually happened, and he knocked him out. So, like, that to me was because in my pick. I don't know if you guys have seen it yet, but I do shitty MMA analysis picks. And so my pick was that the fight would get canceled because it's just been 2 weeks. And that's what happened with Ankalaev and Kutilava. And three other matchups got removed, but that one didn't. So for me, that's the most surprising thing is not only did OSP show up to fight, he knocked a dude out, which was, I think the last time he's knocked someone out like that was, I honestly can't remember. I looked it up after the fight and was in disbelief. It was so long ago where submissions is one thing, but knocking a dude out cold like that, I can't remember. So to me, it was just OSP showing up. That was pretty much it.
Was it Shogun like 6 years ago?
I thought he punted Corey Anderson. I thought he did that. It's all one big one big mess of a thing.
The head kick, yes.
But your point is very well received. It's been a while since OSP starched somebody because he's got power. He was huge. I said in the broadcast during the broadcast that it looks like it's a weight class difference. And even though Menifield's a big guy, OSP would have their sizes. There's that was pretty darn surprising. Duffy, what was surprising to you?
I was literally going to say the same thing he did. that like one, just say Preux versus Menifield just looked like the type of fight that like COVID's going to take this one down. Just something weird's going to happen. I already talked about how surprised I was that Pereira just won the way he did, bar the fuckery at the end. But yeah, I was surprised that Ovince Preux went into this weekend as a betting underdog to a guy coming off of a loss to Devin Clark. And I that sounds insulting that I say it that way, but losing to a guy that is not on Ovince Preux's level, and this fight looked kind of like I thought it would. I mean, OSP has gas tank problems as well. I still think the second Nikita Krylov fight, OSP in that fight, probably the worst display of cardio I've ever seen from a top 15 fighter outside of heavyweight. Just, it was unbelievable how tired he was, how quickly, and just what a shit show it was once it happened. But I was just thinking, like, even if Menifield's cardio is improved, which he, said it was coming into this, he's just such a wilder striker. OSP is a guy who has stuck around in the UFC for now 22 or 23 fights by finding small openings, whether on the ground or on the feet. And Menifield is a guy who's going to give him large openings. And the punch that OSP knocked him out with, that was about the fifth time that Menifield's chin had been about 3 feet away from his feet, just out way over his feet, hands down. Like, OSP said it. He's like his chin was talking to me.
Yeah.
It was like practically hanging out the window and waving at him. And so, yeah, I was surprised that he was an underdog. Not surprised that it ended the way it did, but hey, happy for him. I think he's probably already hit his competitive high water mark when he got a title shot, and unfortunately was against the returning Jon Jones. But it's just crazy that this guy with this game, it's not evolved at all. He's still Von Flue choking people. Like 9 years ago, I was like, well, this will be fun for about 3 fights. And 20 fights later, it's still going on. I love it. And the Hall of fucking awesome, it just awaits this man with open doors a year after his last fight.
Yeah, and it's crazy because he's not that old in the scheme of things. I think he's 37, so he's got several more years left in active competition. He's setting or breaking or meeting records for like finishes and most wins at light heavyweight. So he's one of those guys that's going to be able to hang around there. And if he doesn't get another title shot, that's okay, because not every fighter needs to be a champion. It's not the champion or bust mentality, but he's going to put on amazing performances sometimes. and sometimes he'll get
Oh,
embarrassed.
They'll always be amazing.
and he's going to lose to a guy that he should beat, and he's going to beat a guy that he should lose to, and that's okay. That's kind of the fun allure of OSP in his career. But the story I want to touch on is actually very similar in nature to the ones you brought to the table, in that I am surprised this event happened this weekend. Genuinely, truly surprised it happened, because I believe at the end of the whole arc, I think it was 2 coaches and 2 fighters tested positive, plus ones prior to coming into the fight, Kevin Natividad and Kevin Kroom, who were both going to fight Brian Kelleher, both tested positive prior to appearing. Fighters with COVID attended the weigh-ins. Marcos Rogério de Lima shook Dana White's hand, and then that was the very beginning of the weigh-ins. And then Dana White proceeded to touch everybody else on the fight card. So, this card rolled on with 7 fights, and it's a question that I'll hold for another broadcast. But I was very surprised that it still went on, and it seemed to me like it went on because there was a big fight. If Rogério de Lima had stayed, that first fight with him and Romanov stayed in the card, Sarge Eubanks and Carl Rosa, if that had stayed on the card, and we had lost the Overeem fight, maybe the UFC would have said, oh, okay, all right, let's tap out here. But it's to that point that you look at the card and go, what more is it going to take, guys? Because when one player on a Major League Baseball team test positive, well, the team's off for a week, because that's the smart thing to do, because they're in contact with each other, because they're touching each other and being around each other and breathing in the same airspace. Not to go on a COVID, rabbit hole, but, these fighters are in pretty close proximity to each other. So when multiple people are testing positive and touching stuff and being around each other, it's just, it's going to happen. At this point, we know it's going to happen. And then we see people like our beloved Paige VanZant and Austin Vanderford, Bellator and BKFC, decide that they have COVID. Let's keep training an American top team, because that's smart. So at this point, I wonder what it's going to take for the UFC to say, okay, let's come back. Let's see you next week. We'll take this one off and eat this one, because I don't know what it would take if not for this. 7 fights. We haven't had a 7-fight card since the Ultimate Fighter Season 2 finale. That was in 2005. It was almost 15 years ago that we've had a card this short, I guess. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be short, but this, truncated because of what happened. And it's just fascinating to me. And surprising to me, genuinely surprising, after seeing all these COVID tests. Okay, let's do it. We're still doing this card. When Bellator in March was going on for the Mohegan Sun before everything shut down, Bellator said, hey, we may have some people that may have it. We're not entirely sure. We're going to stop. And they scrapped everything, and they paid all their people the money and moved on. And I expected this would have almost happened, but it didn't. It didn't happen. So, what do you got, Pat?
Well, I'm just going to say, I think it's going to take a breach of contract for the ESPN deal, because they, again, they've got all those shows they have to put on by the end of the year in order to. So I'm pretty sure they're going to put on, if it's 4 fights is the bare minimum, if it's 3 fights, if it's just blocks of time and they have 2 fights and they have to do crazy on the fly in-depth analysis, they're going to do whatever it takes to get that ESPN deal done and not have to reschedule things at this point. I think that's pretty much.
I mean, the UFC can do that. I mean, Cain Velasquez versus Junior Dos Santos on the first UFC on Fox broadcast, one fight, what was it, 50-something seconds? And it was 69. An hour, and it was an hour of broadcast. That hurt everybody. But I don't have a good logical transition, so I'm just going to roll on to an actual news non-event story that's happening. So WWE champion, Universal Champion, and former UFC heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar is a free agent. Not sure where he's going to go. Very well could be leveraging the WWE to pay him more in the contract. This is what he did last time when he came back to the out of testing pool. So Brock Lesnar's in the headlines for worse or for worse, and there are a few people who want to fight him. So this next section is called Choose and Perish. So what that means, you have to select one or the other, even if you hate both of these options, because spoiler alert, you will. So who does Brock Lesnar fight should he return to the UFC? On the one hand, we got current heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic fighting a guy who has not won a fight since I think it was 2009. And the other is former vacated light heavyweight champion Jon Jones, who would again be fighting a guy at a weight class he's never competed at. So who do you got? I'll start with you, Mr. Duffy. Who should Brock fight? Stipe or Jones?
I like that you called this section "Choose and Perish" because if you called it like "Gun to My Head," I would choose the gun half the time. Like with some of these choices you give me, but absolutely give me Jones. I'm sure this was meant to be a short answer thing, but you're getting the long answer anyway.
Sure. Hit it.
I've always been okay with the sideshow aspect of mixed martial arts. I've never tried to divorce the two. I liked the Zulu Zinho fights in Pride just as much as, Fedor versus Crow Cop, except when they actually interfere with the ladder of legitimate contention. Like, I didn't care about, Randy Couture fighting James Toney. I'm like, great, because the winner of that fight wasn't going to get a title shot. You know what I mean? I was fine with CM Punk fighting, friend of the show, Mike Jackson, because as Jackson said to me it was the first real long conversation I ever had with the guy. He's like, 99% of the guys in the UFC think they're there to win the title. Because if not, why would you work your way up through the amateurs, the regionals, get to the UFC? Why would you do all that if you weren't trying to win a title? And he said, Punk's not trying to win a title. I'm not trying to win a title either. I'm an entertainer and I have a chance to entertain on the largest stage in the sport. Why wouldn't I take it? I'm totally down with that. So if you're going to bring Brock Lesnar in, a title shot, an immediate title shot just is that's the travesty right there. Give him an interesting fight. Sure, Jones, that works for me. If Cormier wanted to come out of retirement and fight one more fight, get, his day in Disneyland that he wanted so badly after he won the heavyweight title in the first place, let that happen. Just not an actual title, not something that interferes with the title picture is all I really want out of this. I am that rare guy that I'm not a professional wrestling fan in particular. Like I barely know what goes on in it, yet I completely mark out for Brock Lesnar when he comes to fight. Like, he could be 50 years old, just a walking, steroid stockpile, and I would still tune in and spend my own money on the pay-per-view. I can't explain it. There's just that sense of, oh man, just any crazy thing might happen here, in this case. I can't explain it, but I am definitely a victim of it. So I'm fine with him coming back and give him Jon Jones. Sure.
All right, Pat. So Brock Lesnar, 43 years young, hasn't won a fight since 2010, by the way, not 2009, when he beat Shane Carwin in that very unusual fight where Shane Carwin completely melted and got tapped out in the second. So since then, he's lost to Cain Velasquez, lost to Alistair Overeem, and then although he grinded out Mark Hunt in 2016, he tested positive for a GNC, so that fight was ruled a no contest. So Brock Lesnar could come back trying to get his first win since 2010. Would you pit him against the UFC heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic or the UFC former light heavyweight champion Jon Jones?
Oh, it's Jones 100% as well. For most of the reasons that Ben already covered.
Oh.
The only thing there would be it's for one, it's the only way you're going to get Lesnar back. It's no secret that he was upset about the ESPN deal and the way the pay-per-view cuts work. If you do Stipe versus Brock, there's no way he gets that pay-per-view money, even if it is Brock for the title. It's not as big of a fight as Jones versus Brock. So there's no way he's coming back unless you do Jones versus Brock, probably. Secondly, it's just as Ben said, you want to have fun, you want to have good freak show fights, I'm all about it. If he suddenly could you imagine if he gets a title shot and he somehow wins? You understand the ramifications of what that would mean? Especially because he's more than likely if he comes back, he's more than likely only coming back on a 1-2 fight deal, max. So it's the ramifications of that would just be God. So for all the wrongish right reasons, Brock should face Jones. If between those two choices, I think, outside of that, I'd love DC come back for that fight. I agree with Ben there. I think that's great. Heck, I'd be fine with the Overeem rematch if Reem wants to do that, because why not? Although he's getting paid more than most champions anyway, so I don't know if he needs that. So, we'll see what happens. But yeah, pretty much definitely covered the rest of the points.
Man, I didn't even think of the Overeem match. That's actually not that bad. But, Overeem, well, I mean, he'd take it in a heartbeat. It's such a shame that we're going to be talking about this and then he won't fight in the UFC because this is a negotiation tactic. However, I guess I'll have to agree with Jon Jones, but I do feel like Stipe deserves a break today. I think all the opponents he's faced leading to this point, and how none of them have really been huge money fights, this would be a big money fight, and you want to see that for him. But I also loathe the idea of an 0-2 with a 1-0 contest fighter in the last decade getting a title shot over the likes of Francis Ngannou and Curtis Blades, name. But Brock Lesnar is that kind of joker they could skip in line. And that's just so weird to me. I don't get it. I'll never get it. I understand from a financial aspect, but that logically the smoke comes out my ears. So, yeah, I think Jones has kind of talked about fighter pay and he deserves to make more money. But you darn better believe that this on the top of a pay-per-view would make him more money and would be the kind of fight that he would come out of retirement for, because he's totally retired, guys. But at the same time, I hate the idea of Jon Jones fighting in heavyweight with his first fight being Brock Lesnar. That's not a real test of how he'll fare at heavyweight, because Brock Lesnar is just big, 265, actually like 290. What are these two? I think it was 292 in his last fight. I think is what his walk around weight was on fight day. So I don't know. I don't like it, but I'm going to choose, and I just perished. But there is an alternative. There's always an alternative, because that's my show right now, and we're going to stick with it. The alternative is, instead of going to the UFC, we ship him over to the company rival, a Bellator, and have the ultimate dream match of Brock Lesnar versus Fedor Emelianenko. So that's my best, option for a transition. So we'll go to Bellator now. Bellator this weekend. Yeah, we're moving on from Brock now. Bellator this weekend is having a doubleheader fight card. Lyoto Machida, Phil Davis 2, and the vacant bantamweight title of Juan Archuleta and Patrick Mix to headline the two Friday and Saturday events. And this is also Bellator saying goodbye to Paramount Network, which will be the first time in, 2007? I forget how long it's been since there have been no fights on Spike TV, which then turned into Paramount Network. So Bellator saying goodbye with these cards, and we'll talk about the first headliner, because I think it's important. Machida and Davis are two ex-UFC guys who met once before to potentially determine a light heavyweight challenger for Vadim Nemkov now, because he beat Ryan Bader. Now they met. How long ago did they meet? They met in 2013, so it's been a while, and Davis won a decision that, some people agreed with and disagreed with. So I guess I'll start off with this, and Pat, I'll go with you first. Can Machida upset Davis in the rematch?
I mean, he can, because it's a fist fight, but I don't think he will. I mean, technically he can land a big shot. He still has, he hasn't completely given into old age or wear and tear yet. So he's not, it's not like he's, not dangerous anymore. He still definitely has that. But at the same time, Davis has still looked very good, especially, I mean, like lately he had that knockout, right? Like
yeah.
That's not a typical Phil Davis moment. So, to me, Phil Davis looks better than he has in a while, and Machida looks like age and wear and tear is slowly taking away what little fight career he has left. So to me, it's possible that Machida lands a big shot. That's it. It's over. But I don't see it happening, honestly.
So Duffy Machida, he was on a 4-fight win streak with wins over, well, a controversial win over Eric Anders. He knocked out Vitor Belfort. He took a contentious split decision over Rafael Carvalho, the former middleweight champion, and he flying kneed Chael Sonnen in the face. And then his most recent performance back September last year, he lost a razor-thin split decision to Gegard Mousasi, the middleweight champion. So he's 42. Phil Davis is 35. Davis is on a 2-fight knockout streak. McGeary and Carl Albrechtsen. Duffy, can Machida do it? Can Machida turn back the clock one last time?
OJ said it. He can, because it's a fist fight. Any crazy thing could happen, but I don't think it will. And the thing is, if you'd asked me way back when he was this undefeated, unsolvable, karate phenom, I would have said Lyoto Machida is a guy who could still be doing this at the highest of levels when he's 42 years old. I would have even said that after he lost the title, just because his style wasn't really dependent on fast twitch reflexes, and he was taking next to no damage. But nonetheless, he's not aged that well. You laid out his last 5 fights, and just the eyeball test, how he's looked in the actual fights, he hasn't looked as good as it sounds on paper. And even on paper, you laid out several, major caveats and asterisks there. And even compared to that, he's just not looked good. He's just looked on the verge of getting capped in like all these fights to me. And the people he's really beaten convincingly are people who are even more shot and disinterested than himself, like Sonnen and Belfort. Phil Davis is fighting the best he ever has right now. Like, this is the best Phil Davis we've ever seen. He is doing things that he was not doing 5 years ago. He's doing things that he was not doing at what we thought was the apex of his UFC run. I mean, he just looks absolutely fantastic these days.
And it's interesting because Phil Davis's last 3 wins have come by knockout. Davis's entire career, he has 6 knockouts. So this is a different Mr. Wonderful, and you wonder. But, there's I believe, 15 fights so far scheduled. That's probably about what we're going to get because short notice and COVID and having to go into the bubble. And what is it, the Fight Sphere that they have? They have the isolated area. So we'll probably get about 15 fights. Phil Davis, Machida, Kat Zingano is joining the fray against Gabby Holloway. Ed Ruth versus Taylor Johnson. That's interesting enough, whatever. Then on the other card, Juan Archuleta, Patrick Mix is on the card, John Fitch, and even Gracie. So, Duffy, I'll go with you. Which of these the 15 fights really pops off the page for you?
It feels like a cop-out to choose one of the headliners, but I'm really excited for Archuleta versus Mix.
Nothing wrong with it.
I have Mix in this one. I didn't think this 4 fights ago, but I'm coming around to the idea that he is the truth. He really is as good as he's looked. Archuleta will be a very suitable challenge, very dangerous guy. But yeah, I'm super excited for that one. Other than that, I mean, the return of Roz Hilton, obviously, the winner of that one, like if they wanted to match him up against Brock Lesnar, that would work for me. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, yeah, give me Archuleta versus Mix.
So Pat, there are 15 fights. Duffy's laid out a couple. Is there any one of those that is on the pages that just goes, oh man, that's going to be a good one?
I mean, I think you touched on it. I like Ed Ruth versus Taylor Johnson. I like it a little bit more than probably meets the eye. I think, Ruth definitely is a big name prospect for Bellator. They've really been trying to push him. He seems to have run into a challenge here or there. I can see, for me, I could definitely see it being much more competitive than people think. I mean, my original pick was Archuleta versus Mix, but Duffy already took it, so I'm going on audible here. But I think that's the fight that stands out. After that, I like the Fortune fight, but I also think Tyrell Fortune is just gonna demolish that dude. I think that'll be a fun KO to watch against Jack May. But yeah, I mean, other than that, it's a classic Bellator where you've got Ngannou added, but against someone she should beat fairly easily. You've got We've already talked about Davis versus Machida, where we kind of think where that one's going. It's a lot of favoring certain fighters, it seems, at least, especially based on the odds. So that to me is probably the most interesting one, where I look at that and say that could be more interesting than I think it looks on paper, is Ruth versus Johnson.
And it's interesting to touch on that a little bit. Ed Ruth was undefeated in that Neiman Gracie and went, oh my gosh, there's levels to this grappling game I didn't realize. Came back around to Yaroslav Amosov, the 23, 24-0, the dynamo that came out of nowhere, beat him. And then Tombstone Taylor Johnson fought in Contender Series and lost. And I think all of his fights were in the LFA and they were just demolition. So yeah, that could be a lot of fun. But one fight that you guys didn't mention, I'm so happy you didn't mention, is the co-main event of 246. I am genuinely excited to see John Fitch return against Neiman Gracie. I feel like this is, not only is this a fun fight because both of these guys last competed against Rory McDonald, who was one of the consensus top welterweights in the world for a great amount of time. But I would argue that John Fitch is on a 6-fight win streak. Like, I don't believe that he lost the Rory McDonald fight. I feel like he did enough to win that fight, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And Neiman Gracie was undefeated until he fought a guy who decided, I cannot grapple you and you can't submit me. And I think when it comes to fighters, John Fitch is that kind of reckless, that he's going to look at this Gracie and go, you're a Gracie? What is Gracie? Jiu-Jitsu? Who cares about that? And he's going to go into Gracie's guard and he's going to say, I dare you to tap me out. So I'm looking forward to that, even if it is a Fitching, which it very well could be. The style matchup of my submission defense is better than your offense is a really interesting thing to me, and that could backfire. And next week you guys can yell at me, and I'll be okay with it.
Hey, I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcon's segment over, I mean, almost a year and a half ago at this point was that Rory McDonald spent almost the entire fight, like large stretches of the fight, on the ground with Gracie, just fearless. Like, I've always been a Fitch fan. Like, I love even the fights that people think are boring. When people say he's boring, it's usually just because he's making one of their favorite fighters look completely helpless. So I can't wait for it. I'm excited.
Yeah, I think. I mean, this could be we could be in for a Fitching, and that'd be fine. And we'll see if John Fitch can do what he's going to do this weekend. So let's take it and end it with this one. We have another fight card because the UFC is on a stretch of 23 consecutive weeks of UFC coverage, because that's totally cool, guys. And we're being treated with a card that was already hit hard by the coronavirus a week and a half before the card happened. By that, I mean the headliner, Glover Teixeira and Thiago Santos for light heavyweight, was nixed because of COVID, and we pushed back to a 3-round fight in October, which is a big shame. Up in its place is Michelle Waterson and Angela Hill, 2 strawweights that have been around forever, surprisingly never crossed paths, despite that they kind of swam in similar circles, but Waterson was sometimes at atomweight, so they didn't quite crash together. Well, they're meeting this time in a 5-round fight, which, by the way, Edmund Shabazi and Derek Brunson and the other recent 3-round headliner that for some reason escapes me, were 3-round fights because the fighters said we don't want to prepare. Oh, Anthony Smith and Alexander Rakic were 3-round fights because guys said, nah, I didn't prepare for a 5-round fight, so I'm not ready. These girls said, what, a week? Screw it, let's do 5 rounds, which, by the way, okay, awesome if you like those fights. But there's a lot of criticism, fans and media members and whatnot, about the quality of this card. And unfortunately, a lot of people are claiming this headliner is very weak. So, Pat, where does this main event of these 2 women stand up in compared to other ones in recent memory? Are you feeling this one?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, since the pandemic hit, we've had some really banger pay-per-views, and then we've had a lot of fight nights that are like, huh? And this seems to be, for me, is a bit in the middle. Yes, it's not the strongest fight night card. I agree with that, but it's got some good fights there. I think Waterson versus Hill, just in terms of a headliner, I think is more exciting to me than I versus Calvillo or Even Smith versus Rakic personally, because I kind of figured that fight was going to go the way it went. But it's one of those things where, like, you look down the card beyond just a headliner. I think Karma Worthy is going to be a great fight against the undefeated Bulldozer. You've got Billy Portantello versus Kyle Nelson, which I think is a sleeper fight that's really good. You got Roosevelt Roberts versus Matt Frivola, which should be super good. Like, I think there's more depth here than people want to admit. Now, come fight night, what this actually looks like, who knows? It might end up being, if those fights all get called off because of COVID, well, then it's looking pretty weak.
Or if we end up wishing that some of them had gotten canceled because of COVID, if we find ourselves like pining for those days of 7 and 8 fight cards.
Well, that is something that I've seen by a lot of people. Like, their 7 fight card wasn't so bad. It didn't eat up my entire week. I wasn't completely destroyed by it. And
here's the difference, though, because it was on ESPN. They weren't beholden to pay-per-view pacing. Because if they took those same 7 fights and had to spread them out over 6 hours just to meet obligations, we would have been screaming. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, give me more of these where it's just a compact product.
So this one isn't as compact. There are 12 fights on the card, Mr. Duffy. And there are some fights that may seem like filler, but there are also some surprisingly compelling matchups, like Ed Herman versus Mike Slow Rodriguez, a COVID-ravaged fight that you look at and go, well, that's not half bad. Something terrible is about to happen in this fight. And I don't mean terrible, bad fight. I mean, someone's probably going to wake up after the fight's over and go, what happened? So, Duffy, in addition to the main event, what does this card bring to the table for you?
A lot of interesting matchups, a lot of interesting storylines for individual people. I can't help but, as we move into the last quarter of the year of COVID in MMA, kind of look at who has benefited this year, like who's kind of stepped up and done good things for themselves. Bobby Green is fighting Alan Patrick, like just a few weeks from, his second consecutive win where he beat Lando Veneta. He, in a battle of two guys that sometimes, self-destruct or don't fight to their best strategic benefit, he came out ahead. If he beats Alan Patrick and he has won 3 straight fights in 2020, I mean, he's not Khamzat Chimaev, who just came out of nowhere and is all of a sudden the UFC shiny new thing, but he's one of those guys like Brian Kelleher, who's just quietly done himself a world of good in what's a difficult time for a lot of fighters. So I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see Julia Avila and Sijara Eubanks because I'm really, really high on Julia Avila. She, by all means, should be undefeated right now. She has a TKO loss because one of her fingers got put on sideways. And as frustrating as Sijara Eubanks, has been, she's a very good fighter. She's one of those women who's just much, much better than her record looks. So yeah, I'm super excited for it. And as much flack as the main event is getting, there are 2 fighters that I've always enjoyed watching, have always kind of rooted for, and by all means should be much bigger stars than they are. The UFC has not figured a way to sell us, these two women is kind of damning, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll pose one final question, and it's going to be a short one. Would you look at this main event differently had Angela Hill actually officially beaten Claudia Gadelha? Because many believed, as myself included, that Angela Hill should have won the decision against Claudia Gadelha in May, because Hill is one of those other fighters like Kelleher, like Green, who are taking multiple fights this year and really benefiting from it. Gilbert Burns, another. So yeah, I guess, Pat, I'll go with you. Would this main event be a lot more significant had Angela Hill beaten Gadelha and being on a 4-fight win streak?
I don't think it would be a lot more significant. I think it would be significant. I think it would add a little bit and really speak more to the rise of Angela Hill, especially then if she beats Waterson. That kind of really starts to build her up into a title contender and all the promotion and storyline surrounding that. But I think right now, unfortunately, one thing going against Hill and Waterson is they're right about where they should be in terms of of record, I would say. Like, Hill hasn't quite proven that she's ready. This is a good step up for her to see if she's ready to take on that elite tier. Whereas Waterson has proven that she's really good and, 5 to 10, but really struggles against some of the elite. So because of that, because you're looking at this, no matter what, with that win or loss, you're still looking at this as a kind of like mid-tier fight, like almost elite, but not quite there. I don't think it adds that much significance if she has that win on her record.
Duffy, well, I'm with you.
If she'd won against Gadelha, as I think she should have, this fight wouldn't be made. She'd be on a 4-fight win streak, and Waterson would be coming off of 2 straight losses. I would think of it a little differently because, I mean, even if they made the fight, they'd both be unequivocally top 10 women right now. And you can't complain too much about a fight night main event in the midst of 27 main events that they have to put some fight into that has 2 top 10 women. It doesn't, whether fairly or not. So, that does affect even my perception of it. And yeah, it's a bummer. This is a year when Angela Hill really just kind of finally seemed to be putting it together. She moved off of my top 10 Scream at the TV fighters list. I was screaming at the TV after the Gadelha fight, but it wasn't because of Hill this time. So, yeah, I hope she's able to turn it around. Interesting personality, interesting style fighter I want to see more of. And for that to happen, they have to keep winning.
Yeah, I mean, I really do agree with you guys that the UFC could have marketed these 2 fighters a lot better than they did. And it's a huge disservice to them and many other fighters that you can picture that go, man, how are they not a superstar? How is Stipe Miocic, a firefighter, first responder, heavyweight champion, everyman, not the king of kings? And Angela Hill, interesting and engaging and funny and active and has a fun style. And yet people scoff at it. I don't know. It's number 8 versus number 13 in the UFC rankings. I think it's going to be a fun scrap. I think it's probably going to go 25 minutes and people will be mad about that, but it's going to be, I think it's going to be fun MMA. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. So I'll say I'm looking forward to it. So with that, we're going to wrap up this show. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Pat. You can find Pat's work on Body Lock MMA. Anywhere else, Pat? Any other locations you want to shout?
No, I do have something in the works, but it's not MMA related, and so yeah.
Okay. Well, you can check out his Twitter handle. It'll be probably down here. Mr. Duffy, you can find him on SureDog.com. Anything you'd like to plug, sir?
Nope. You just go to SureDog.com and you find my stuff there. Follow me on Twitter if you want. I don't care.
And you can also find his recaps and reviews and revisions of the draft of The Ultimate Fighter on SureDog.com. Those are actually very entertaining. You can find me, Jay Petrie, at SureDog.com. I'm on the features tab. You can find me along the little right side column, writing all kinds of things, and you can't miss it. So with that, I'd like to bid you all adieu. I don't want to do Ant Walker sign off, so I'll just say have a good night, everybody.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Walkout Network. It's your man, Ant Walker, joined by the man with the facts, the figures, the stats, and the numbers, Jay Petrie, the associate editor of SureDog.com. Jay, how you doing today, my man?
I'm doing well. I like this whole idea of the split shows to see if we can cover different topics and different kinds of things like that. I'm looking forward to doing this. It's a good trial run. I guess I'll reiterate my stat of the week real quick that I did in the previous broadcast. Stat of the week is 2. Alistair Overeem, after beating Gusto Sakai in the 5th round, is the second UFC fighter to ever win and lose a fight in the 5th round, because he lost a fight to Jairzinho Rosenstrike with the lip splitter, and Glover Teixeira, who did it in May when he did terrible, horrible things to Anthony Smith, was the first. So yeah, Alistair Overeem, he's a unique cat.
Wow, that guy's made a lot of records. I get, like, he's just done a lot of things in MMA.
Yeah.
You talk about a complete career without having a UFC belt. Alistair Overeem is the poster child for overall MMA Hall of Fame. I'd say he'd be a first ballot, in my opinion, on that. So one cool thing about us doing a little bit of a stripped down show is that we're going to skip right to the stuff that really matters. We're going to jump through the fluff, and we're going to go to the greatest titled segment in all of media history, and that is I'm Not Surprised, Mr. Falcons. And this is where we get to share something that surprised us or didn't surprise us throughout the previous week, whether it be pre-fight coverage, the fights themselves, post-fight, or any related news. So, Jay, I'll start with you. What is your I'm Not Surprised, Mr. Falcons moment this week?
So the previous show, I decided to break down that I was very surprised the UFC ran the card this past weekend with 7 fights, because a lot of the fights, I believe 3 fights were changed on fight day because of the coronavirus. And with the coronavirus clearly impacting fight camps and coaches and everything in between, there's a very specific topic involving popular fighters in UFC, formerly UFC and Bellator, that are dealing with COVID right just now. Bellator fighter Austin Vanderford was forced to pull out of his Bellator fight upcoming weekend because turns out he has COVID. And as he shares a toothbrush with wife Paige VanZant, she has COVID as well. And the reason why this is an issue to me beyond simply, oh, boy, that's not good, I hope they recover, because they're dealing with symptoms and they're clearly sick from the virus, is the way the couple carried on despite knowing they had the virus. Austin Vanderford tested positive for COVID multiple times. Bellator pulled him from the card. So there was no secret that, hey, I have COVID. I have symptoms of COVID. I'm not asymptomatic. I don't know what's going on. But despite that, okay, I get tested on whatever day, and I test positive. And instead of going home and quarantining, I go to American Top Team to train, because that's what Austin Vanderford did, and proceeded to interact with people. And you can see this is all public information on his and hers Instagram pages. There's no fabrications here. That an ill Paige VanZant potentially with COVID and with a COVID infected husband are publicly going along, carrying out their business. And that's an issue to me because of how many ATT fighters have been testing positive lately. How many of the coaching staff have been testing positive lately. Think of the fighters, Ong Lang Sung, Gilbert Burns, Jack Ray Sosa. This is not an unusual thing for ATT.
The head coach, Mike Brown, tested positive as well.
Yeah, and the problem is that ATT has become kind of a hotspot for COVID, which is a very scary thing for a top team like that. I didn't mean it like that. But there we go. 2 popular prominent fighters doing stuff with active knowledge of COVID. Paige VanZant is now at BKFC. You know what she did last week? BKFC press conference, BKFC meet and greets, because there's a BKFC event this weekend. So there she is. There are pictures of Paige VanZant. No mask, no gloves, no nothing. Hey, super fans, how you doing? Look at this. Hey, look how cool I am. Are you kidding? Is this real? Like, how can... I don't like to target fighters and be mean-spirited and angry, but how can you be this stupid? Seriously? There's a deadly pandemic. There's no hoax about it. There's no nonsense here. Their science is evolving as we're learning more about it, trying to figure out and get to the bottom of this thing. And yet we're dealing with this in a fashion in America that most countries are not. And it's because of stupid stuff like this. And it blows my mind how it's almost okay. Paige is posting on Instagram, hey, MMA fans, I have COVID. What do you think I should do? Hey, how about you go to a doctor and stop being around people? Like, how is this a thing? How has this developed into the kind of idiocy where this is okay to happen? Is it going to take lawsuits? Because I feel like their active knowledge of having the coronavirus and knowingly exposing people to this and spreading it, could draw liability. It blows my mind, and it's something that's going to persist. ATT is a big gym, and other people will almost certainly be affected by it. And I don't know. It's just it's September. We've been dealing with this since March. How do we not know? And So I am so not surprised that I am surprised that I am not surprised. Yeah, we're going all the way around. That it hurts my brain to think about. But here we are in September 2020, and we're going training and going on bike rides and having meet and greets with active COVID diagnoses.
That is one of the dumbest things I've heard out of a sport that consistently provides dumb things.
It's I can't figure it out.
At this point, like, you know, I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier in that segment there. You're saying, like, not be mean and not target fighters, but this wouldn't even fall remotely in that category, because this is a case of fighters doing something blatantly stupid.
Yes.
Blatantly selfish.
Yes.
Just blatantly arrogant and just totally self-centered. And also with the, you know, you're being a lawyer, you'll definitely have much more expertise than I would in this, but I'm kind of thinking, where you're talking about lawsuits and stuff, it makes a lot of sense. There are laws on the books in most states where if you have HIV, for instance, and you go out and have unprotected sex, that you are criminally liable for other people catching the virus. It seems like this is the same sort of thing. If you are knowingly walking around with this in your system and you are not taking any measures to protect those around you, sounds like something worth a lawyer taking a look at.
It's I have the feeling there are going to be suits like this. I mean, you look at another very famous example of the Sturgis rally that happened in South Dakota, and numbers are indicating that maybe upwards of 250,000 people were affected by this. Totally, how could we have seen this coming? You gather tens and hundreds of thousands of people together in close proximity that don't wear masks. How could you have seen this coming? And that's that kind of liability that we're starting to look at and go, we're gonna see some real interesting court developments with this.
Yeah, and then also too, you think about PVZ's, like, her expanded role that looks like it's going to be taking place with BKFC as far as commentary and whatever other work they're going to have her doing outside of fighting. And I clearly an ambassador for that organization now. Do you want to infect your fan base? you want to infect all the other fighters that are scheduled to compete and everything? It just they're without any sort of, I don't know, just self-serving bullshit, to put it lightly. I don't even know what else to say about this one, but I'm equally surprised that I'm not surprised that I'm surprised. So, wow. Well, let's go on to something a little bit on the more lighthearted side. I'm not surprised. Mr. Falcon's moment comes courtesy of former bantamweight title challenger Bethe Correia, who was after her recent loss to Pani Kianzit was cut by the UFC. However, now it appears that they have re-signed her so that she can have a retirement bout. This is to take place December 5th. And I'm very surprised by this, simply because this is not something that the UFC typically does. Normally, if they cut a fighter, no matter whatever the emotional attachment may be or what they've previously done with the organization, if they cut them, they cut them, and maybe they fight their way back, maybe they don't. But I'm thinking back to Dan Kelly, the judo expert from Australia, who campaigned for a retirement bout in Australia, and he wanted his son, who's ill, to walk him out to the cage, and to be this, nice bonding moment, and him to kind of have a final send off in front of his hometown fans. And the UFC just pretty much didn't return that phone call. So I'm very surprised that Bethe Correia has gotten this sort of treatment. I'd like to see the UFC doing something like this, because she, while she didn't exactly have the most successful run, she did get a title shot in Brazil. She did have a good amount of hype behind her, and hey, why not? Why not send her off nicely? That's something I'd like to see more often. I'm just surprised that Bethe Correia was the recipient of this, as opposed to some of the other people that may have been put in that position. But interesting stuff from there. But let's move along just to some regular questions that we got to ask outside of the greatest title segment in all of media history. So Khamzat Khamzat Chimaev. Ooh, yes, I'm finally getting that pronunciation right. Now, we've heard some interesting news about him. He has been double booked, apparently.
Yeah.
According to some reports now, he is scheduled to fight Gerald Meerschaert coming up soon. But also, there's been talk about him having a fight against number 7 ranked Damian Maia in Fight Island. Jay, and just come right out with it here. The MMA gods tend to not like us ignoring the power they hold upon this carnival that we like to pretend is a sport. Is the UFC making a mistake here by booking Khamzat twice?
Oh my God. They are spitting in the face of the MMA gods here. This is not I mean, honest and truly, I think I might be leaning towards Gerald Meerschaert in the fight. Gerald Meerschaert is, he's 31-13. He's a live by the sword, die by the sword submission artist. He's very willing to go to the ground. We very well may see Chimaev take this fight to the ground in the first 10 seconds. But Meerschaert's a very crafty veteran, and he's a huge guy. He is a big 185er. He's a guy who can go up to 205 and, not be undersized. And Chimaev is I don't know if I feel like going to 70 or 185, I can do both kind of thing. And this is a very dangerous situation for him to be looking past. But he doesn't even think of the opponent. I would argue he didn't even look into who he was fighting first before saying, I want to fight Damian Maia. I believe that he thought this is a name. Maia is a huge name, a legend of the game, a top 10 guy. I'm going to get him, I'm going to beat him, and I'm going to move up the rankings. And looking past Gerald Meerschaert at 185 is a very risky proposition. I mean, the UFC extremely rarely looks ahead to what the future is for a fighter. I mean, Dana White is notorious for saying at the end of a press conference, I don't want to look ahead. I don't want to say who's next, really, not very often, unless it's obvious. I want to let the dust settle, talk it over, figure out what's next for the fighters. But in this instance, and in 2 others lately, it's been, let's put the fighters in on the way. John Alenarte, a fighter from Brazil who actually tested positive for something recently and is coming off suspension. I don't recall the substance, but it was a banned substance, was double booked, and one of his fights has already fallen off. And another one he is scheduled for is in November on the Garbrandt Figueiredo card. And the other was Julia Avila, who has been scheduled to fight Nico Montano and Carol Rosa for a while. And those kept falling off, kept going away. Sarge Eubanks was set to fight, oddly enough, Carol Rosa this past weekend. COVID happened. And now Julia Avila is fighting Sarge Eubanks while also being scheduled to fight Nico Montano in October. So we don't know if that's still intact. We don't have any. I think it's probably off the books. But this is not a good idea. Let the fight happen. Let's see what happens. What happens if the fight goes on and Chimaev tweaks his knee because he shoots in for a takedown and he gets kind of stuffed, and any number of odd situations to already have another fight in the books in a month, maybe, or maybe less than a month, because September 19th is the Meerschaert fight. Fight Island is from 243 to 244, so any span of time along the way, it's just not smart. That the UFC is hitching itself to the wagon of Chimaev a little early, and I don't trust the MMA gods to let it happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting when you look at what Gerald Meerschaert has accomplished in the UFC. Now, he's definitely not someone who's in line for a title shot, but size being one factor here. He's someone who has competed at 205 as well, big middleweight. So this is someone who size-wise just doesn't seem like the wisest idea to just look past. But then you look at the list of names of people that he's fought. This is a guy who was able to take Kevin Holland to a split decision. He took Eric Anders to a split decision. He submitted Deron Wynn, submitted Trevin Giles. Like, this guy has real names on his resume. And all of these names are much more, with the exception of Deron Wynn, much more experience than Khamzat. Much more accomplishments than Khamzat in mixed martial arts. It just doesn't compute. This is not the guy that you just look past. And this is a sport where it's dangerous to look past someone in the first place. You know, how many times have you done a media day or you interviewed a fighter at any point, and we kind of know what path could be ahead of them? If you get past this fight, you're probably in line for a title eliminator, or you might be in line for a title shot, and they say, no, I got to focus on what's in front of me right now. That's a very common thing for a reason. Yeah. It's you got to stay focused at the task at hand. Gerald Meerschaert is not someone to dismiss by any stretch of the imagination. Now, I favor Khamzat to win that fight, but that doesn't mean he walks away unscathed.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that he just runs over him and he's free and clear to then go and fight Damian Maia the Tuesday after. That's just not how this works. How many times have you seen a fighter absolutely run through someone and they have an injury as a result? I think Daniel Cormier knocking out Stipe Miocic in the first round of their first fight and breaking his thumb in the process. You know, these things happen, win or lose. So to just injuries planning around just seems nuts. Then let's get into Damian Maia himself. While he's on the last leg of his career, admittedly so. I mean, he was calling for a retirement bout against Diego Sanchez in the not too distant past, something that I still think makes a lot of sense for both gentlemen.
Yeah.
This is still a guy who will twist you into a pretzel like it's nothing. Like it's absolutely nothing. And ranked number 7. And then you think, if he gets past Damian Maia, say he gets through Meerschaert, no problem. You know, 2 weeks later, he gets through Damian Maia, no problem. Then what? You beat the number 7 ranked guy. Are you ready for Khamzat to fight a Leon Edwards? Are you favoring him against a Jorge Masvidal?
You know, I feel for Edwards because I feel like that's a fight they would give him.
Yeah. It's it looks like my camera jacked up here. So I'll just keep talking while I figure out the camera situation here. Oh, there we go. We'll go with the other camera. The low grade cameras. Let me move this. All right, here we go. So does this sound like a good idea to you? I don't think so. I don't like this at all. I like to see contenders built up properly. I like to see fighters able to truly develop, as opposed to there we go. There's the good camera. That's the good camera. We move that screen back. There we go. That's what we like to see happen, and especially a guy who has the potential of doing some big things in the sport. You don't want to see his ascension ruined by poor matchmaking, and I think this is beyond the MMA gods, beyond the injuries and whatnot. This is not the best way to develop a fighter. But I'll give him credit for being ambitious and going out there after it. So
yeah, and I'd like to point out something. One of our newer recruits, Lev Pisarski, wrote an excellent column about the state of the UFC matchmaking. I think it's the Tweedledee and the Tweedledum of UFC matchmaking, something along those lines, on Sherdog.com, speaking about how the UFC seems to have been building lose-lose matchups. Like the example Lev gave was about Ngannou versus Blades 2. In that, what happens when one wins? Well, the best case scenario for one fighter and the best case scenario for the other fighter isn't that great. And at the same, you will lose more with one of them losing than the other way. Like if he gets beaten by Meerschaert, well, that other fight's off the table. The Maia fight's gone, and that's a weird thing to think about. That a top 10 fight could be on the table and gone in a week because of the way, you know, the fight game is very fickle. So this matchmaking is very confusing to me. You know what it is? In this COVID era, in this call-out era, in this 50 G's baby era, call-outs work way better than they used to. The UFC is, anecdotally at least, from what I can observe, much more apt to grant a fighter calling out another fighter, saying, hey, he called him out. That means we automatically immediately have the beginning of the promo package. Here we go. He just started the promo. Let's see how he goes with it. And that's risky and that's dangerous because that gives that leads to Michel Pereira going, "Hey, Jorge Masvidal, let's fight." What? That doesn't make sense. But maybe that's just me. But I feel like that there's some issues with matchmaking. Who wants to see Masvidal versus Pereira?
Yeah, I mean, you're on to something there, because I think it's a combination of COVID and this busy schedule. Like, they are committed to fulfilling the contractual obligations for this insanely busy schedule, which pre-COVID was already crazy.
Yep.
So now you take, like, what you think about all the moving pieces going on here. You have fighters scattered around the world, all with their own injuries and personal issues and whatnot, all with their own ambitions of who they want to fight next. Matching up with someone else who's got the same issues and they're scattered around the world. Then on top of that, you got to fit in all these pieces for the 12 and 13 bout cards, at least before the pandemic gets to them. And now with COVID, you've now taken so many of these pieces away from the puzzle, and now it's just a bag of mixed nuts. So when someone is calling someone out, oh wow, that just got really easy to book that fight, so let's just do it.
Yep.
It's kind of taking the work away from the matchmakers, which I'm sure they need a break, because this has got to be a very trying time to piece together full events. But at the same time, it's not doing the sport any favors, and definitely not doing the fighters any favors with how all of this is playing out. But we did mention the name Jorge Masvidal, and looks like he is a topic of discussion yet again. So it looks like he is now booked to fight Nate Diaz, in which if I'm remembering this correctly, it seems like this is being billed as a BMF title defense. Did I hear that properly?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, Jesus Christ. So why, Jay? Why? What are we doing here?
I mean, the first thing I can think of is Livegate dollars in the UFC's hopes that January 2021, suddenly we can host live events again, because American Top Team is totally going to be careful and not give fighters COVID. Oh, that's right. Who trains out of American Top Team? So it's the situation where this won't be sitting on the Nunes Anderson card or the Usman card or whatever pay-per-view, but this will be its own headlining affair to try and get fans back in the building. And I can see them the UFC trying to run that and use that angle of it's the baddest man on the planet or something like that. But it's really another UFC fighter getting a title shot off of a loss. And let's be very frank here. The first fight was not very competitive. There is nothing that indicates this fight will play out any differently than the first. Nate Diaz is 95% scar tissue. Jorge Masvidal hits with lots of volume. He hits hard, and he is able to find Nate Diaz's face, because Nate Diaz says, "Hit me, I dare you." Look what happened in the first Conor McGregor fight. Only that, Conor got tired and he choked him out. But this is one of those few fights. Rematches sometimes play out differently. Randy beat Chuck once. What? And then you see the next fights that happen. But I can't see anything different happening. And then to top it all off, you're bringing back that stupid fake Intercontinental Championship belt. What is happening here? Why? That why question you asked is a question I'm going to throw back at you, because the stupid MF title, how is this not just collecting dust on a shelf somewhere? Why is this still a marketing tool the UFC is actually opting for? Are they that out of options?
They must be. I mean, the BMF title should have died the day that Kamaru Usman got his hand raised over Jorge Masvidal.
Yes.
So it fulfilled my wish when they first started talking this BMF stuff. I wanted the BMF winner to get a legitimate title shot, so that way when they lost, the belt was now merged with the actual title, and once again, the baddest motherfucker in the division is the champion, as it should be.
Who knew?
It's such an amazing concept. So now are you going to convince people that the baddest motherfucker is the guy who just lost against a guy who he already just wiped the floor with? I'm not understanding this. I know that there are a lot of stupid people out there who probably will pay to see this simply because it's Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal wears a Scarface suit on at the press conference. I'm sure there are people that stupid, but good Lord. Are we just going to roll out the red carpet for all the stupid people of the world? This makes absolutely zero sense. From a competitive standpoint, there is absolutely nothing that says we need to see this fight again. To all the dummies out there who claim that this doctor stoppage was a robbery, please watch it again. Please watch again as Jorge Masvidal picked Nate Diaz apart at will. Watch as Nate tried to muster offense and only got stifled and beaten further, and his face was hanging off. Please go ahead and watch that and tell me that you want to see that again, that you think if you put those two in front of each other, that something different is going to happen.
I mean, Jorge Masvidal had 2 knockdowns, 112 significant strikes to 43. Like, he landed more strikes than Nate threw. Like, this is not he even got a takedown because what? It's
because he could. Like, that's
kind of what it boiled down to is I can do you. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to hurt me or stop me, or you're not going to get me on the ground and choke me out. I can beat you everywhere. But it just feels like this is a really unfortunate era in terms of legitimacy in the sport, because this isn't the only circus show in town, and that's what bothers me more than anything. If this were, fairly normal standard course, and then we get weird once in a while, okay, but we're not. This isn't a one-off thing, first of all, because we have 2 BMF title fights, but we're also having to think about other goofballs come back to the sport, like Brock Lesnar. Like, the sporting aspect is fading so fast this year compared to the entertainment aspect. I don't know. I'm not thrilled about any of these odd situations.
Well, if that's the case, I think I'll know the answer to this question when I ask you, but for shits and giggles, let me go ahead and ask you anyway. Choose or perish. All right. Now, select one of these options, no matter how much you may dislike both of them. Brock Lesnar does return. Let's say he does. But there's been talk about, we have this discussion every 6 months when he wants to play contract games with the WWE. But here we are falling for it again. The only thing I can say about that, at least it's not Floyd Mayweather fooling us this time. So who should Brock fight upon this supposed UFC return? Stipe or Jon Jones?
I'm trying to make a devil's advocate argument here and say that there should be some sort of reason that Stipe Miocic should get this payday on the grounds that Lesnar had an exemption to come back to USADA, if I remember correctly, in 2016 to fight Mark Hunt. And because of that, he wasn't able to purge his system in time or get clean because he tested positive for clomidaletra, I believe, estrogen blockers, which traditionally mean there's so much testosterone in your body, it's trying to bring up the estrogen, so you're trying to bring that down. So logically and probably pharmaceutically speaking, if he's testing positive for clomidaletra, it's because his levels were artificially enhanced on the other direction. But other than that, he brutalized whom I believe, I could be wrong on this, and that's okay, a top 10 Mark Hunt at the time, top 15 Mark Hunt. And he didn't really get hit very often, and he tossed Mark Hunt around. Is that enough to get a title shot 4 or 5 years later? Of course not. But Stipe Miocic has fought a murderer's row of opponents in his time in the UFC. It's actually kind of shocking. I mean, I've been trying to think of the last, I don't want to say easy fight because it's heavyweight, but the last easy fight. He fought Daniel Cormier 3 times in a row. It probably would have to go back to 2014 to Fabio Maldonado, who, by the way, was a 4-day replacement so they could keep this card going on, and said, hey, Fabio, you can get to 215, right? Cool. Fight this guy. What could possibly go wrong? 35 seconds later, he's face down. But this line of guys that Stipe has fought, Dos Santos, Hunt, Arlovsky. This was a Arlovsky that was rising. This is Arlovsky, I don't know, 5.0, 4.0. I don't know where we were on the scale. For Doom, Overeem, Dos Santos again, Ngannou, DC. I mean, you can't get an easy fight in that mess. And I would defy Adonis to pick an easier fight than that. It's shocking how tough his schedule is. So I almost want him, Stipe Miocic, to have his payday, because I don't know if he's ever had one, and then get back to a regularly scheduled program. Francis Ngannou and him can dance again, even though I also believe very little will happen differently unless he gets clipped on the way in. So for devil's advocate, I would love to see Stipe Miocic finally get the payday he deserves, because he has the longest, but before he lost the title to Cormier, the longest title defense streak in UFC heavyweight history. That is incredible that he was able to defend his belt against 3 murderers in the division and come out okay. That doesn't happen at heavyweight. That just doesn't happen. So Stipe to get that big kind of stock boosting performance, which is so weird, because how would beating Brock Lesnar boost your stock? And yet he would be an ultra star if he beat the brakes off of Brock Lesnar. So I hate myself in the morning. I want to see Stipe just 30-second knockout. I'm the world champ, and make $20 million.
You know what? That is a very convincing argument right there. Like that, I honestly was not prepared to go in that direction, but I like that you went in that direction, because I'm thinking back to when Brock Lesnar interrupted Daniel Cormier's victory party at UFC 226, and the idea was like, okay, if Cormier fights Brock, yeah, that's a totally farcical matchup, and Brock has done literally nothing to deserve this. However, man, it'd be nice to see DC get a super payday.
Yep,
it sure would be nice, and I'd like to see Stipe get that payday as well. But I'm going to go in the other direction here, simply because we need to represent some sporting integrity. Because clearly the topics today just show that this sport is going clearly off the rails here. So I'm going to try to bring a little bit of sanity back here. If you bring Brock Lesnar back into the fold and he fights Jon Jones first, not only do you have a mega fight, not only do you have a fight that they were trying to set up post UFC 214, you've got also a way for Jon Jones to earn a title shot by fighting a legitimate heavyweight, and then fighting the actual champion. Now, I say Jon Jones has done more than enough to earn a title shot in any division he wants. If Jones decided he's going to fight at featherweight, watch out, Volkanovski, because that's your next guy.
That one arm, one leg Jones is coming for you.
He's earned it. He's earned it at that point. If he wants to get a gender reassignment and he wants to take on Amanda Nunes, hey, I'm all for it, because he's earned it. He's done that much in the sport. But you can't. It's hard for me to not push towards some level of integrity in the sport. And however silly Brock Lesnar coming back to the UFC would be, at least he's a real heavyweight who once held the belt. Jon Jones gets a win over him, which I think he would absolutely annihilate him. Then, okay, you've got a title eliminator of sorts. And then, conversely, if Brock Lesnar were able to beat Jon Jones, kind of hard to deny him a title shot.
No kidding.
Now we can throw away all this UFC 200 USADA shenanigans. We can throw away the clomiphene. I mean, we can just throw that away, because man, he beat Jon Jones. So kind of hard to say he shouldn't fight Stipe next. So I think that is the path to legitimacy. However illegitimate that path starts off, if that makes sense. Does it? Maybe. I don't know.
You beat Jon Jones, you deserve a shot at any division you fight at too. So I understand.
Yeah, so we'll leave it at that. But I think this is a true choose or perish situation here, because I don't really like the idea of Brock Lesnar coming back. I don't like the idea of us talking about Brock Lesnar coming back. It's one of those things where I'll believe it when I see him with his Canadian fight kit on. That's when I'll believe it. Until then, like, this is just all bluster for him to make another $10 million on his WWE contract. And why this sport keeps falling forward, quite honestly, I'd rather see him go to Bellator than to the UFC.
Fight Czech Congo, or who would you have him? Who would you have?
Just do the Fedor fight. Just do the Fedor fight in Bellator. Verdum, I'm sure, could be lured into Bellator for that one as well. So those are fights that sound fun, sound entertaining, have some air of legitimacy, however thin that air may be, and it doesn't interrupt the actual real heavyweight title picture that we're watching right now in the UFC, which heavyweight is more exciting in the UFC than it's ever been, in my opinion, right now.
Yeah.
So hey, let's Brock, just I don't know, do something else. Just take off the turnbuckles or something. I'm done with this. All right. Well, now it's time. I would say flex my authority on you mofos, but it's only 2 mofos a day. And this is the speed bag. So we are going to start the clock, but I'm going to mix things up a little bit.
All right.
I typically am the one who does the 30 seconds to answer every question. Jay, today is your turn.
Ooh.
30 seconds to answer every question. Now, I want to be fair as far as the reading of the questions go.
Sure.
Because I don't want too much time to be ticked away on that. So what I'll do is I will pause the clock as I'm reading the next question.
Okay.
And then we'll rock from there. All right. So first question. The UFC ran with 7 fights this past week. What is the lowest number you think the UFC would still run an event with? You have 30 seconds beginning now, sir.
You know, honest and truly, I think the UFC would have run a 5-fight card if Overeem and Sakai had stayed on the event. If they had lost that, they probably would have dumped the card.
All right. Nice. Now, will training with Masvidal help Tyron Woodley against Colby Covington?
Oh, I didn't hear the ding.
Yeah.
I don't know if it will. I don't know because it depends on if they're training an American top team or if they're training somewhere else. I don't know. I don't see much of a great path to victory unless he can take Colby down. And Masvidal's not going to help for that.
All right. So now BKFC 12 is this weekend. Who you got? Thiago Alves or Julian Lane?
Let me bang, bro. No, I mean, this is Lane has gone 2-2 in BK, and Thiago Alves, no, never has, and that's too bad. Thiago, let's get weird.
I was going to let you finish that one because, like, this is such a ridiculous fight.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that you can kind of schedule and bank time to work.
Yeah, you know. Sorry. So I guess now I'll give myself 30 seconds. I will keep the clock running as the questions are read, and we'll do it the usual style here. Got to put the pressure on myself there. So UFC ran with 7 fights this past week. What is the lowest number you think the UFC would still run an event with? We're talking about an organization that had an hour-long special for a 64-second fight on the first Fox card. The sky's the limit. Training with Masvidal might help Woodley against Covington only because he's familiar with him too in training, but not really. Woodley's got to shore up his cardio. That's the first thing. UFC 12 this weekend. It doesn't matter. I guess Alves, but I mean this. It's BKFC. Come on now, dude. We taking it seriously?
Well, Paige is. She's showing meet and greets with COVID, so she's on fire. Quite literally. I think she has a fever.
All right. Well, we're going to conclude things today with the briefest of discussions here. We've got another one of the UFC offerings in the marathon leading up to a much-deserved break on the week of December 12th. This time, the card will be headlined by Michelle Waterson and Angela Hill after a lot of turnaround as far as COVID is concerned. So, Jay, give me one pick you have here, a sleeper for fight of the night, or just something that you're looking forward to on this card.
Well, first, I would like to again speak out on behalf of this main event and say, you know, it actually isn't that bad. I believe that Angela Hill won her fight against Claudia Gadelha, which means, you know, she is a de facto top 10 fighter, I would believe, even though I think she is 13 and Waterson's 8. So I can get behind it. I'm looking forward to 5 rounds of that. However, in terms of sleeper interesting, Ed Herman and Mike Rodriguez is going to be a first-round knockout, so that'll be fun. And my interesting fight of the night, I got to go with Frank Camacho, Brock Weaver. I like the idea. It's going to be one of those old-school Rock'em Sock'em Robot fights, and I like those. I feel like every now and then I need to kind of appease my base sense of MMA violence because we appreciate the technical performances and we enjoy the grappling exchanges. We love all of that parts, but every now and then a slobber knocker is just like, Okay. All right. I feel good now. I feel like I, got my juices flowing. I'm ready to get recharged in there. So that's the fight that I think is going to be one of those. And when you say one of those, I'm excited about that prospect.
Yeah, that actually would have been my first pick for a potential sleeper fight of the night. That Camacho and Weaver fight just sounds ridiculous. Now, when I was looking at this card, trying to think of what the fight would be that I'd answer this question with, I just started seeing a lot of names that just sound exciting. It's a lot to look forward to on this card. So I'll kick it back to Roosevelt Roberts versus Matt Frivola.
That's a great one.
Yes, please. Sign me up all day. And I'm really curious to see what Roberts looks like rebounding from the Jim Miller loss. That should be a very interesting test for a guy who's proven to be a promising prospect. Bobby Green on the card as well. He would, depending on what version of him shows up, it can be very exciting. I think we should also take a look out for Andrea Lee versus Roxanne Modafferi. That has the potential of being the best card, also the best fight, also potential for being the worst fight on the card. So
the first one wasn't that bad, actually.
Right. Yeah. So that just stylistically, it can play out to be very exciting, or it can be very sluggish to get through, but we'll see. So let's see, what other am I forgetting anything? I think that's it for this week. I guess also too, before we move on, I do have to point out Angela Hill, the first African-American woman to headline a UFC card. Yes, we know it's by accident because it's supposed to be Thiago Sanchez versus Glover Teixeira, but you know what, Angie, go ahead, take them roses. Enjoy it. Of course, in this program we stand for Angela Hill. She is the homie. So best of luck to her on that one, and congrats on a huge milestone. So that will do it for this edition of Unleashed and a Half. I don't know what we're calling this experiment. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If so, go ahead, drop so in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, tell that friend to tell 10 more friends. Of course, you can check out Jay's work on SureDog.com. You can check out my work on the Body Lock, MMA on Point, and I guess I got to call Kristen so we can do another column for my MMA news, but that'll happen. I promise it'll happen at some point. But you know what you got to do. Stay beautiful. Stay positive. Don't share your toothbrush with someone COVID infected, and always stay sexy. I will see you when I see you. Peace.